As parents raising children in a very challenging culture, we want our children to grow up to have the freedom, spiritually, psychologically, and financially, to live out their Catholic values and beliefs and help change the world. Successful entrepreneur Mark Wilson is here today to share his innovative program for teaching Catholic entrepreneurship for homeschooling families.
Welcome to Homeschooling Saints, the podcast that helps you create the homeschool you love for the people you love. Our host is Lisa Mladinich, a Catholic life coach, TV host, best-selling author, and an instructor at Homeschool Connections.
Before we get started, remember to subscribe to this podcast so you never miss an episode. And if you're watching on YouTube, click the bell to join our channel. Hello, I'm Lisa Mladinich, your host. Before we get started, remember to subscribe to this podcast so you never miss an episode. And if you're watching on YouTube, click the bell to join our channel. Today, I have the great pleasure of talking with Mark Wilson about his exciting new training opportunity, Catholic Entrepreneurship for Homeschooling Families. Mark Wilson is an architect, industrial designer, and entrepreneur with 40 years of international experience. He studied in both American and Italian universities. Having worked in Italy for many years, he acquired cross-cultural, cross-disciplinary, and cross-industry skills in the furniture, yacht, product, and architectural fields. Mark started his company, 𝐒𝐚𝐬𝐬, with a declaration to God he calls the accidental consecration, dedicating himself and his designs in service to God. He quickly learned that doing such changes everything. From research done over many years, he learned that St. Paul, the early Christians, the Irish monks, followed by the Dominican laity and Franciscan Third Order of the Middle Ages, all worked in a very similar faith-filled way. It is Mark's mission to regenerate this approach to work so that people can not only work out their salvation, but show society a better way of working and living that gives glory to God. Now, I have multiple links to find Mark and his work in the show notes, but his main website for looking at his incredible design work is coroflot.com/mwilson, and that's coroflot.com/mwilson, just the way it sounds. And again, that's in the show notes, along with more links to his training program, Ecclesiastical Ventures, and a shareable PDF as well. Welcome to the podcast, Mark.
Thank you, Lisa.
Oh, it's so good to have you here. I'm fascinated by the work you do, how beautiful it is, and your faith story. So would you step us into what moved you from being an entrepreneur and a business person and a designer into promoting entrepreneurism for Catholic families?
Well, I had left a partnership while working in Florence and needed to find something to do. And I had the prototype of this fork, which of course is 𝐒𝐚𝐬𝐬, and because of the circumstances of leaving that relationship, I wanted to build an environment where there was no moral compromise. So that led me to this doing this accidental consecration, And, I remember the words that I used 30 years ago as if it were yesterday. And I believe God was calling me to do this. So, sometimes the circumstances just have to be created. And in fact, a priest had told me I should be an entrepreneur. He told me that when I first graduated from college. And he would say it as the years would pass, and this priest became my first investor. And he would just keep repeating it, and every year or two. And so I didn't really have the courage to do it because I got married, had our daughter, who's our oldest of 5, and those big dreams of climbing the corporate ladder no longer mattered to me. So I said a prayer and said, Lord, if this is you that believes that this should happen, I don't have the courage to do it. And but if you want to arrange it, then go ahead and arrange it, and I'll go along with it. And so I believe that's probably what led to that partnership in Italy going south. And there I found myself being an entrepreneur. But because of the circumstances, I became really adamant about wanting my work to be free of any kind of moral compromise. So I did this dedication, and then I just started seeing things happen that didn't happen in the 12, 13 years before in corporate life. And we often grow up and we're trained, certainly in U.S. business schools, to be in charge and be in control and make it happen. And when one is willing to surrender their will to God and put God in charge, and that's what happens with all consecrated works, right? I mean, this is true for whether it's a religious consecration, so some nuns, some friars, monks, whatever. God's in charge. He's the boss. We're there to glorify him with what we do. And I used to believe that, if people couldn't accomplish something that they set out to do, they were lazy, stupid, uncommitted. Well, I learned the hard way that once God is in charge, you can do absolutely everything right. And if it's not God's will for it to happen, it will not happen. And then I used to find this particularly humorous, where I would think, wow, I can't believe this worked out. I did everything wrong. There's no logical reason that this should have worked out. So I slowly stumbled into this way of living and working. For example, and you can interrupt me at any time.
No, this is such an interesting story. Thank you.
At that time when the partnership went south, I got a notice from the U.S. Patent Office that the patent had gone through on this fork. And it was like, okay, you need 20 million lira to extend the patent throughout Europe, the rest of the world, wherever you want to extend it. And I had a week to come up with 20 million lira, which was
what is that in US?
Yeah, it was about $20,000 at the time.
Okay.
About $20,000. And so I left my patent agent's office. I said, thank you. Okay, we'll see what we can do. He said, you need a miracle. You need a miracle. You need someone like, and he named this minister of health or labor. I forget what his title was. And as soon as I left his office, I went to a church which was nearby, just a small church. And back then, they're everywhere, and they were open then. Now, that's not the case. So I leave the office, and I walk into the church. There's nobody there. It's in the afternoon. Go before the tabernacle, kneel, say a very quick prayer. Lord, I have no means to come up with $20,000 in a week, but you can do anything, And so, you have to bring this money if you want this to move forward. And I left, and I reminded him that it was his work. So I said, it's your responsibility to do this. And I was very bold in that period of time, because when I did the consecration, I had an experience. And so I interpreted that experience that I had as an affirmation and as being like a chosen one. And of course, that can be a dangerous thing to think. But in any event, I left that little church, and the only thing I could think of doing, I had no clue what I could do, but a thought came to me to thank a gentleman in Bologna, Italy, who was kind of a mid-sized Italian industrialist, who the week before had taken me throughout Emilia-Romagna, where Bologna is, Modena, Parma, that whole area there, to all these manufacturers that could make the fork. And this was like 1990, 1991. And he had a cell phone that was it was the size of those like military walkie-talkies you saw in World War II, but like nobody else had cell phones back then. And I remember thinking, wow, this guy gave me half of his day. I said, I should thank him. And a little side note, when you embark on this way of living, you will just develop some discernment capabilities. You'll begin to understand when a thought is your own, or if someone downstairs is attacking your imagination. If you have a great deal of peace, it's coming from somewhere else. And so, I know that was an inspiration to call Bruno. And I called and I said, Bruno, I'm just calling you to thank you for giving me so much time last week. Well, how's it going? I said, well, not great, and he goes, I got somebody I want you to meet. Will you hop in the train and come up tomorrow? And I said, sure, I'll go anywhere, do anything. I got to come up with 20 million lira by, next Monday, and this was like Monday the week before. And I go up there and he introduces me to this gentleman. And this gentleman saw the prototype and he said, so let me give you a little background. This fork I designed to be the most comfortable utensil in the world. Okay, effortless to use. And I don't want to use this as some kind of plug for the product, but this is important because I was focused on comfort. The fork, spoon, and knife, as we know it, was first set on the table of all places in Florence, Italy, where I was at the time. And hasn't changed much in 500 years. And so I was focused on comfort, but there's also something else. My design concept for this was to develop a fork that would have the kind of ease of use that the lever handle has on a door compared to a round doorknob. The reason for this is all I ever knew in the United States was round doorknobs. This is going back a ways. And in Italy, all they've ever had is a lever handle. And I thought, wow, that is absolutely the most comfortable handle and effortless to use. We'd probably be onto something if we could come up with a design, if I could develop a design that would be to flatware what that lever handle is to the round doorknob. Well, obviously, though this is not like a product specifically designed for people with hand problems, goes without saying that if it's extremely comfortable and easy to use, like that lever handle, which certainly isn't a handicap product, it's going to be effortless to use for somebody that finds using a regular fork, spoon, and knife difficult. And I like to add, who hasn't spilled peas back on their plate? And, when we have soup, we typically would grab a spoon like this because it's basically just a stick with a head on it. So it's what I learned later. It's called fine motor, activity. That, tremor can happen pretty easily. I mean, I don't know. I think everybody's probably spilled soup as well. So I didn't know when I designed it. And I believe this is part of the inspiration. I believe that God guiding me to design this, that there are benefits that I never considered. So obviously this has implications for 40 million people with arthritis affecting the hands, or 40 some million people with carpal tunnel. And so this gentleman in Bologna, Italy said, listen, when you go back to Florence, would you go to Rome tomorrow if I can get you 10 minutes of this gentleman's time? And the gentleman he was going to introduce me to worked for that minister that my patent agent said, you need to find somebody like that. You need a miracle. You need to sit down with someone like this. So next thing you know, I go back to Florence and cash was really tight. And I bought a ticket, went to Rome, and met with this gentleman. And that was a fairly interesting story as well, because it turned out that this young attorney, who was the president of the Italian labor union, youngest graduate attorney in Italy, I think he was 28 or 29 at the time, he happened to have a right brain injury that made it possible for him to hold this exactly the same way I hold it or you would hold it, right? And I sat down in front of him. I'm talking for 5 minutes. He says, you have 5 minutes left. And then he reached over and he grabbed something, and I could see the way he grabbed it, that he had a right brain injury. So I reached out, I grabbed his hand. I figured, I've got 5 minutes left. I got to do something radical here. And I just shoved it. I just shoved this into his hand. And I said, and you hold that just like me. And as far as I'm concerned, you're not physically challenged when it comes to eating. And he looked at me like this, and I said, oh my God, he's going to call the carabinieri, I don't know, he's going to call the guards or something. And he looked at me for a second, and then he set the prototype down, and he picked up the phone and called Italian Health. Because I don't care what you're doing, you drop it. And well, this is Rome, and it's kind of like the Vatican, where things
Slow-moving.
Yes, where here things can happen in an hour or whatever. It's going to be at least a day over there, multiplied by 24. So I didn't have the money for a hotel. I took the train back to Florence, got up at 4:00, got there in time to go to the meeting at 9. And they went in the back after he said, tell them what you told me. They typed out a contract for 20 million lira, which is to the penny what I needed, for R&D, with the stipulation that we would manufacture curveware in Italy, which we do. And they wanted to distribute curveware throughout Europe. I go back to Florence, and my patent agent says, well, go choose your house on the Cayman Islands. You just have no clue the value of this contract and how much you're going to need to make of this, the volumes. So I thought that was it. This is great. So no, that was a great example of something very positive. Now here's the very negative thing. A week or two later, I go to the newsstand to get the newspaper, the La Repubblica, La Nazione, the various Italian newspapers. Front page, CEO, CFO, COO of Italsanità, the one I had a contract, they all went to prison. And that made my contract worth nothing. But in God's providence, I was able to get them to pay on the contract. So I did get the money, was able to move the project forward. And then when my wife was expecting our second child, I gave her the horrible news that I had to get on a plane the next day to come to the US to start curveware, and I'd come back and get her. And so it's been a real roller coaster ride. What happens is once the lights start to go on and you realize, for example, I went to the ordination of a young priest. And after we were at the reception, a woman asked me what I do. And I really didn't want to talk about it, And so I said something kind of crazy. I forget the comment actually that I made. And she said, you consecrated your company. And I go, what? She goes, you consecrated your company. That's why those things happen. She goes, dedicated. I said, oh, absolutely. I dedicated it to God without question. She goes, well, you didn't really think things were going to work the way they did before, did you? And, I found that to be very providential, because that woman got me on the path to say, okay, what's going on here? I certainly can't be the first person who has done this. Excuse me, just one second. And of course, I began reading the Bible. I began doing research. And of course, the great thing about Italy is, in Florence in particular, you can go back and get the tax records of someone 1,000 years ago,
Wow.
Probably further in the archives. And so Italy was the perfect place to begin digging in to get really kind of bulletproof data information on how these things work. And this kind of leads me to what you were saying before we went live, that, it really means a great deal to me that we start everything with prayer, because I've come to realize over many years the importance of prayer for everything. And without it, what you're really saying is that you're in charge and you're in control. And that is a reality that many Catholic entrepreneurs, they don't understand the fact that to really fulfill the will of God, you have to put him in charge. You have to consecrate your work. What I've seen in Catholic business schools across the country, and I've lectured at a few of them, is that what they're really doing and what they're teaching is secular entrepreneurship with a lot of Catholic flavoring. Okay. And yes, as you said in the introduction, this is about helping Catholic homeschooling families. But it's basically the same thing, whether you're helping a high school student start their venture or an adult. And in fact, I really love the idea that parents and children start their venture together, because that's what they did in the Middle Ages. But I'm going to stop here and say one more thing, and then I'll stop and let you ask some questions. But it's really this simple. And a lot of people will understand it intellectually, but they won't understand it in their heart. And I mean, I could give dozens of examples with where that was the case and is the case with myself. You understand it intellectually, but you're not ready to really understand it in a deep way. But I believe that St. Paul was the most effective evangelist because he was well, we could talk about the Holy Family and how they worked, and that's kind of a parallel subject. But with regards to St. Paul, as many know, I'm sure, he was a military tent maker, and he supported himself. And he claims in the Acts that, I have a right to be supported for what I'm doing, but he chose to support himself. Well, he used to get some pretty big contracts. So, he'd turn to Aquila and Priscilla, who were also tent makers, and say, hey, we got to make 50 tents here. But if they got an order in the hundreds, then what he would do, from everything that I've discerned and learned, and I'm trying to get more information on this. It's not easy. This is the most difficult. It's much easier to get information on the Irish monks and the Dominican laity and the Franciscan friars. But it only stands to reason. St. Paul would never hire anyone or teach anyone or get collaborators that weren't people of goodwill. Jesus Christ did not waste his time with people that were not of goodwill. And those that were obstinate. That's why he remained completely silent before Herod. It's like, I'm wasting my time. I'm not going to waste my time. He didn't utter a word. But when someone is a person of goodwill, they're open to the truth. So he would have a bunch of people that are open to the truth, and I can just see St. Paul. He's offering Mass in the morning. And then, it was a Jewish tradition to do like the Liturgy of the Hours. So he was working and praying and working and praying and working and praying and working and praying. Well, what happens in an environment like that amongst people that are people of goodwill is they catch the faith, right? And when you're with someone like St. Paul and you see these unbelievable things. I mean, I mentioned a couple extraordinary things that happened with me. I can imagine the miraculous things, happening with St. Paul. And so I could see where he was doing two things. Yes, they're working. They're earning money. They're making tents. But he was gathering and forming other evangelists. And so his efforts were greatly multiplied. And as they would say in business schools, scaled up, right, to then get the word out, spread the gospel in a very significant way. What I've found is that this lasts for about 150 years before secular society does everything it can to stomp it out. Then the Irish monks kind of regenerated it. And then same thing, time goes by, but the Irish monks go into France and Italy. And then the Italian laity remembered those things that the Irish had done. So they approached St. Francis and St. Dominic, because this was in the first couple of years of the founding of those two orders. And both St. Dominic and St. Francis understood this. So this is why there's like churches everywhere in Florence. They're everywhere. And it's because every one of those churches had a corporazione. There's they call them arte fiorentine, which in English would be like the guilds. But the guilds were the association, right? But the corporations, so if you were a gold master and made gold products, that was your for-profit company. And every one of them, from what I could see, or most of them were tied in to the parish with the Franciscans or the Dominicans that were supporting them. And I feel like one thing I need to say, none of this would be possible if it wasn't for my spiritual director, Father Tom Collins. It just wouldn't happen. because one, you need that prayerful support. You need their discernment capabilities, because it's very rare that the laity will have the discernment capabilities of a religious. It's pretty rare. So I guess, anything can happen that God wants to happen, but it's really makes a lot of sense to have that spiritual director who guides it. So kind of wrap this aspect of it up. When I started realizing what they had done in the past, Father Tom Collins and I sat down and we said, what we need to do? We need to regenerate that. But we need to do it in a way that makes sense for today. Because if you Google guild, you're going to find tons of misinformation. I would say probably 95 to 99 out of 100 people have a misunderstanding of what the guilds really, really were, and how a completely pagan secular society like Florence, Italy, became Catholic and was run by Catholics. That they took over, City Hall.
So in other words, sort of a merchant class of people running businesses, but praying and working like the religious orders had, were able to rebuild a Catholic society in Florence.
Yes, and they asked them specifically to write the rule for their lives. So in Florence, it was pretty much Franciscans and Dominicans. All of those corporazioni, those for-profit corporations that were working in this way, they, stopped throughout the day to do the prayers, to fulfill the requirements. But there's other aspects. They all had patron saints, and they all had philanthropic work that they were committed to. And what they learned through the process is the beauty of poverty. So when you have very successful companies, so let's bring this into today, okay? So like I was saying, if you look at a lot of Catholic organizations, let's say Catholic guilds, you'll see that they're nostalgic. They're sitting there and making woodworking or Gregorian chants, and I love Gregorian chants, I want to be clear about that. But when it comes to making products, if you could transport those people from 800 years ago to today, they would think that this nostalgic stuff is ludicrous. And I believe at one time, nostalgia was considered a mortal sin in the Catholic Church. I mean, I guess it depends, of course, upon the degree of nostalgia. But if someone is nostalgic and they're letting this false understanding and this romantic notion or however you would describe it, kind of run things, it's not good. So none of those people from 800 years ago would be doing woodworking. They were the big innovators. Mm-hmm. The first two patents were of a guildman. The master of one of these corporations, Brunelleschi, who did the famous dome in Florence. He got the first two patents, and he was an extremely serious Catholic. You won't find this anywhere other than documents in Florence, Italy, but it's well documented.
Okay, Mark, I want to have you spend the last sort of segment in our conversation because I feel like so much is probably resonating with our audience. A couple of things. One is most homeschools have a patron saint or are consecrated in a sense prayerfully to God in some sort of way. So we're going to resonate with that idea immediately, that God's in charge ultimately of our homeschools. We also want to turn out a quality product. We're looking at our children's souls and their impact on the world. And so we're already kind of in that mode and innovating on little budgets and embracing the poverty of having one parent at home full time most of the time. A lot of us moms and some stay-at-home dads do have sidelines, but we get it. We're juggling a lot and we're trying to make it all work for the sake of our higher values. Say a little bit about how Catholics interested in your program would apply and what would they learn in your program? What are kind of the nuts and bolts of what this program takes them through? Okay,
well, this is something that we've just launched like weeks ago. And there's a family that are members of the Institute of Christ the King out in Missouri. And it's father and son. And the 15-year-old has just a remarkably deep faith. And I told him it doesn't matter what it is he wants to start. This will probably not be the venture that he, will wind up doing the rest of his life. And but I said, you're going to learn the things that you need to learn. So there's 3 components. And so like throughout the week, one day relates to the spiritual formation, the prayer life, these things. The beautiful thing about most Catholic homeschoolers is that they really get this, because typically the mother is putting a big emphasis, like my daughter puts a big emphasis on religious education. So it is remarkable to have a conversation with a 15-year-old that understands these concepts better, this is not an exaggeration, than college students. And so I said, okay, well, Michael, we'll kind of dispense with that. We'll use Monday for something else. Then one day of the week is for entrepreneurial related things, different types of company structure, and what's appropriate for this kind of business. And there's things like, I'm just going over it in kind of broad strokes, how do you raise money and how you build a management team. And my specialty, of course, is product-based businesses. So whether it's surgical instruments or consumer products or furniture, it's going to be something that's going to be made. And the reason that I like that more than service-related ecclesiastical ventures is that there's a very good likelihood, if it's a product that's going to have very big demand, that it could result in a Butler building going up and some manufacturing equipment and 100, 150 employees. And just imagine 100, 150 employees working and praying throughout the day. And I want to step back to those Middle Ages. That's the way that it worked. And they started at like 9 and 10 years old. Because at 9 and 10 years old, they'd be sweeping the floor or running errands or doing whatever. But then when they're 11 and 12, they're starting to make suggestions. They're starting to recognize things that can be improved. And now they're getting greater responsibilities. By the time they're 15, they pretty much know everything about how that corporazione is working. By the time they're 16 or 17, they're ready to start their own venture. And that's how it was possible for a teenage boy and girl, or I would like to say young man and young woman, that were very mature, to get married before they were 20 and have the means to have a family, support that family. The Middle Ages, contrary to what most people believe, is probably the best period in human history. There's more upward mobility than any other time. And it's really an extraordinary time that's been, lack of a better word, trashed by those that are not, let's say, friends of the church.
Yeah, because the church would have been a extremely dominant culture at that time. But so the steps would be that they apply for your program, and then they learn the spiritual, they learn business structures, they learn about building a team. What else is going to be incorporated into their learning?
We have the makings of a forum where I will be laying out the various subject matters. So it'll be like, there'll be various documents for like raising money or confidentiality agreements, What I'm hoping will happen, and of course, like any entrepreneurial thing, you have to learn how it's going to start and how it's going to scale up. So I personally can teach about 30 students over the course of the week. And some of those days are flexible. Other information is given to everyone who logs in, right? And then they can post questions. You have to go, what happens if this thing blows up? What are we going to do? And of course, we're limited to a couple of languages, English and Italian. But, if anybody speaks either of those 2 languages, it really doesn't matter where they are in the world other than time zone restrictions. But I love the idea of there being these teenagers that are logging into the forum where they say, hey, I'm working on this, and what are you working on? And oh, hey, here's how I solved that problem. And the beauty of this is something, it was actually, I forget who it was, but it's a book written by, I think, a faithful Protestant called Moving at the Speed of Trust. And this is something that's so important because it doesn't matter. I've met with a number of venture capitalists. I've raised a fair amount of money, and it's not something that's really entrepreneurs want to do, but it's kind of necessary if there's needs for tooling and 150,000 in patents, and you just don't have that in your back pocket. And when a venture capitalist is going to put $2.5 million into a venture, the thing that takes them a year is the due diligence, because the team could have all graduated from MIT or Harvard. That doesn't tell you that they're trustworthy. And there are just it's a lot of examples of one relatively recent of a big pharma company, and the CEO, taken hundreds of millions of dollars, because $50 million is seed money in the pharma world, and then all of a sudden, they discover this product is no good, and and this is where one's faith comes in. When you realize something that is really significant, being surrounded by trusting and trustworthy people, you can make those decisions to say, we're going to risk the company. We're not going to move forward, and we're going to try and figure out how these families can survive, but we're not going to be a party to this immoral way of doing business. And there aren't many corporate leaders that will do that. It's a very, very small percentage. So, as you move forward, and the more money that is involved, the stakes keep getting raised higher and higher and higher. And this is where having a spiritual combat formation is really very important. I would recommend that everybody say the Auxilium Christianorum prayers of the Deloran Fathers. Father Ripperger, the founder, is an exorcist, and they're just great prayers to say every day to make sure your cage isn't getting rattled. And I mean specifically like demonic oppression or obsession or worse. And I've seen even worse happen. So when a lot is at stake, especially when it comes to the salvation of souls, you're going to come under attack without a doubt. So if you have a company with 150 employees, like one of my stockholders is a remarkable Catholic, more than 25% of his employees have converted to Catholicism. I mean, that's a hard thing for me to wrap my head around. But we've had long conversations because he invested so long ago before I had worked out all the details. So now we're talking about how he needs to tweak his business, so that the crazy things that were happening that just don't seem normal, right? And that's why you need a spiritual director, because it's hard to know, bad things happen to good people. And, you can't say everything is demonic, of course. But if it happens repeatedly, you start to see a pattern, it happens at a certain time, you really want a spiritual director and go, here's what's going on. And unfortunately, we live in a world where most pastors haven't been formed to deal with this. And even bishops. A bishop that I'm fairly close with said, when I was in Rome, everything was a psychosis. That's how they explained away demonic involvement. It was a psychosis, right? Mm-hmm. And of course, he learned that is not the case in a pretty spectacular way. And so he's one of the few bishops to have, set up an office and they have an exorcist, because he recognizes the reality of this. So again, bottom line here, it's all about our salvation. Mm-hmm. We work out our salvation. We want to be in an environment where we sanctify everything we do. And it's beautiful, because when you have collaborators, they don't see it as this competitive thing. And it's wonderful to have somebody alongside of you who you welcome correcting you, because they're doing it for the best reason.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Well, you are a treasure, Mark, with all of your experience and deep knowledge of this, for a family to be kind of forming maybe the germ of an idea of something entrepreneurial they might create, or even a service. But with your expertise in product creation and all of everything that goes along with that, but also the spiritual side of things, a way to be that Catholic presence in the world. So grateful to have you with us today, Mark. You want to close us out with a final thought?
Yes, well, people are going to be thinking about this because it's only logical. One of the beautiful things about the internet, and even the craziness that's happened in the past couple of years, because there's people that I'm having Zoom and meetings with that probably don't hardly know how to turn on a computer, right? And this is part of what makes it happen, because there is a cost associated with this teaching, but I'm able to charge for a month what I used to charge per hour when there are 30 students, right? Because my reason for doing this is not, I just don't see this as business, but there are expenses associated with it. But so that's kind of how that works. And then something that we'll see how this rolls out. In addition to ecclesiastical ventures, I worked with an attorney in Denver who's a venture attorney. He's an attorney who puts funds together, big funds together. And we call it Nicodemus Ventures, because St. Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus, these were two businessmen. And they had it was a big deal for them to take Jesus down from the cross. That's it. That just ruined all of the relationships they had in business. They were gone like that. Right. And so I can just imagine the conversations they had with Jesus about business and how business ought to take place. And there are writings of different mystics like Catherine Emmerich and Maria of Agreda and others, where you can read these things and get a sense of these very personal inner relationships. So our hope with Curveware is that the majority of the vast majority of the dividends, our dividends, will fund Nicodemus Ventures, so that these Catholic parents and children that start a venture can know that there's a source to fund their venture. It's the kind of source, the way that it should be. Well, one closing thought. Imagine a world with, I don't know, we could throw out names like Walmart and Amazon. So there's some big, big companies where the leadership have basically taken vows of poverty. Now, I don't mean vows of poverty like the religious. That's a different thing. But this is what happened in the Middle Ages in Florence, Italy. We'll use it in today's terms. If it was a $200-300 million company, the CEO could say, well, we're empty nesters. There's my wife and I, and we don't need a $5 million a year salary and all these perks. $150,000 really enables us to. They live a simple existence, and they embrace it, and they realize the freedom that comes with being detached from all this stuff. And we live in a country where it's just part of the way that we're raised. This great exorcist, Father Ripperger, says, if there is a national sin or demon who's most influential, it's the demon of greed, avarice. And it's just so pervasive. And and I, by the grace of God, lived in Italy in a period of time where all I could bring was in 2 suitcases. I didn't have my 2 sailboats, BMW, all this other stuff. I had just a few things. Great view of Florence. This was before I met my wife, and I felt so free. It was not a religious experience. It wasn't intentional. It's just the way that it was. But I began to see how I didn't have any of these things that I used to have, but reminded me of this thing that St. John of the Cross said, possessing everything and having nothing. You start to think about that. How do you have this feeling of having everything? You first of all, you have no debt, you don't owe anybody anything. You just have a very simple existence, and there's an enormous freedom in there on many levels. So I hope I haven't overwhelmed you with all of this, but I'm really very appreciative.
It's lovely and it's exciting, Mark. Thank you so much, really, for taking the time out of your busy day to be with us and to share with us from the heart about this kind of being in business, being a holy path, being a path that can draw other souls to God while you're building a really fine business, a really good working business that gives glory to God in a lot of ways.
One last closing thought.
Oh,
I'm
sure.
sorry, like those companies, those Catholic for-profit companies in Florence, Italy, were such wonderful places to work that, it just drew people in. And that's how Catholicism took over Florence, Italy, because it was founded by the Romans. You can go to Piazza della Repubblica, not far from the Duomo. That's where the Roman grid is. And and so it was absolutely pagan in its foundation and formation. But, when people of goodwill see that someone else is happier, they're joyful, they're peaceful, everybody wants that. And executives, there's lots of examples of executives taking huge cuts in salary to have a job where they can sleep like a baby and not have all that stress in their life. So it's a wonderful way to work. And I would welcome anyone, reaching out to me with any questions they have.
Okay, so is the best way for them to reach out to you to go to the coraflot.com and Wilson?
They can just email me at markw, MARKW, at curveware.com. And there's no E in the middle, so it's CURVWARE.com. And if they just put like Ecclesiastical Ventures in the subject line, then I'll flag it and be happy to answer any questions that anyone has. So they just give me 24 hours.
No, fantastic. I hope lots of you will reach out. This program, just being birthed into the world, just starting to find its footing, is based on just an incredible life so far and a lot of research. So thank you again, Mark. And everybody, please stay tuned for our short feature coming right up.
Thank you.
Welcome to the Thriving Catholic Homeschool Blueprint. My name is Paola Ciskanik. I'm the co-founder of the Catholic Homeschool Network, Conferences, and Community. This is step 3 in my blueprint. Print out one grid for each child in your family. Now, the first subject or item to add into that grid, and this is the grid for each child for this coming year, please add the one goal per child that you wrote down from the previous video and the worksheets that you did. Now, I think the first thing that people always say to me and comment when they look at those grids is it doesn't really look like a typical brick and mortar school day. And you know what? That's right. I did that on purpose because you see, we are so lucky. We get to do homework. That's right. As part of our average, ordinary school day, we get to have our children work on mastery, not just checking off boxes, not just finishing up the assignments and trying to plow through the books. So go ahead, add in the most important skills that you picked up and highlight that one. Remember that one goal can be reading, math facts. Maybe it's time management skills, learning to write a paragraph, learning about the stars, volunteer work in the community. Go ahead, pop in that one goal, that one subject in the grid for each one of your children. The next step is to take an inventory of all the, what I like to call, non-negotiables in a family life. I have another set of sheets called reflection worksheets, and these will help you to think through things like what subject, if any, do you want to do as a family? How often? I always recommend that these are used as discussion prompts for you and for your spouse. It's a great way for you to get both on the same page before you jump into the new school year. Actually, they're great any time of year too. Now, once you've done this process, you've printed out a grid for each child. You've put in their one goal. You went through all the non-negotiables. Go ahead, take a breath, a sigh of relief, because you have focused on the uniqueness of your child. You have a realistic goal for your child by choosing that one goal this year to see progress and growth. And you have taken into account your family's life, their season of life, what's going on in this year. You've set your life first. And now we're going to layer in the school. As you create the plan for each child, whether you're using a set packaged curriculum or designing your own, or maybe a combination of both, these are just some great guidelines for you to map in all those subjects, but always highlighting the most important one. The majority of schoolwork you see can be accomplished on 4 days a week, except of course maybe math or languages, where you kind of need that little bit by bit learning every day to see progress. You can use that extra day for kind of catch-up day or scheduling doctor's appointments. What I do want you to include, though, is read aloud time, maybe 3-4 times a week, something you can do in the evening. It's super fun, super important. It brings the family together. And please do not stop when the kids are reading on their own, because as an added bonus, reading lays the foundation for higher level thinking. I could go on and on about the benefits of reading aloud, but perhaps that could be another workshop I do someday. So next, what I do is I ask my children to take ownership of what they are responsible for each day. Of course, when the kids are very little, maybe they're just learning to read or write, I would determine those daily assignments I want them to cover, and I would keep that in a binder. But as my children got older, past those primary years, around the 10 to 12-year-old age, about the time they start arguing with you, I would tailor the overall big picture of education unique to the strengths, interests, passions of that individual child, focusing on that one area of growth. But I would suggest that at about 6th grade, you just give a weekly list of the assignments you want them to do and have them map out each day of the week when they're going to do that. Now, you're going to have to model it for them the first time around. Maybe give yourself that first month to get adjusted to this. This requires your children to begin learning a life skill, time management, and more importantly, taking ownership of the things that they have determined they're going to get done. You can look over the assignments. You can see if there's any adjustments that need to be made. And the other thing I really, really encourage you to do is to take some time out for yourself. I'll see you in the next video, and may God bless you abundantly.
And that's our show for today. Our program is sponsored by homeschoolconnections.com. Be sure to subscribe to Homeschooling Saints and leave us an honest review. God bless you, and thank you for joining us.